Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So today I have something special for you. This is going to be a video about the top 10 worst unique items in Diablo II Resurrected. Of course, if there are the best or the most underrated, well, there has to also be something that is considered the worst, the trashiest, most garbage unique items in the game that you probably want to throw on the ground. Do these items have any uses at all? Probably. But the real moral of the story is that they are among the worst unique items of Diablo II Resurrected. So without further ado, let's jump into the list. I'm not going to be presenting these in any specific order. I don't want to rank the worst items from number 1 to number 10 because that's just a waste of my time. Because that's how bad they are. So without further ado, let's jump into the first of the horrible, horrible uniques, the Viperfork. So you might be asking yourself, why is the Viperfork one of the worst uniques in the game? Well, it's one of the worst uniques in the game for quite a large number of reasons. And we're going to go over them together. The Viperfork is an elite base man catcher, which means it is extremely fast and it does decent melee damage. And as I said before, I'm not saying that a weapon can't be useful. It's still one of the worst unique items in the game, even if it can technically be useful. The problem is that even in its most optimal state, it is subpar below just about every other choice that you could possibly put on a character. For instance, if you had an Ariox Needle with +4 skills, it would easily be a lot better than a Viperfork Mancatcher. And then we have to think about what the Viperfork Mancatcher is trying to achieve. So it's trying to achieve high poison damage, right? So we got 325 poison damage over 10 seconds, which is laughable at level 71. It's absolutely gross in just the idea of 325 poison damage being enough. And this falls in line with a lot of unique items because a lot of unique items that are based off of poison damage have really, really bad poison damage for their level. Only one item in the game that stands out for me that actually has poison damage that's high enough to actually be useful is the Jade Tando Chris, which I actually just recently made a video on. That has 180 at level 19. So I want you to put that in perspective. The Jade Tando has 180 poison damage at level 19, but this item barely has double that at level 71. Absolutely terrible amount of poison damage. On top of that, it also has a 15% chance to cast level 9 Poison Explosion on striking, which will not stack with the poison damage on the blade, or on the spear, rather. And this is also an issue because poison damage doesn't stack, and a lot of these poison damage weapons have poison damage from multiple sources, like a poison damage on the blade, like a casted ability, a charge, and a whole bunch of other things, and none of the poison effects stack together. The only special thing that this weapon has that honestly makes it anywhere near considerable for any kind of character is the fact that the poison explosion will consume corpses. So technically, very technically, you could use the Viperfork Mancatcher as a way to absorb corpses. But you would be much better off using something like Redemption, or just simply some cold damage, so the monsters explode, or explode into shards of ice. There's a lot of ways to get rid of corpses, and I just don't really see this as being one of them. Even in its optimal form, which is the ethereal form, it's still not higher damage than most other melee weapons that you can put on a mercenary. For instance, an Insight Polearm would still be better. A Infinity would be better. A Obedience Mancatcher would be 1,000 times better. Obedience Mancatcher is literally godlike by compared to this thing. The only reason that you would ever conceivably put this weapon on a mercenary, in my opinion, is if you didn't have anything else to put on him, and this was the only thing you had. If you were a ladder character who's just starting the ladder, and you happen to find an ethereal Viperfork Mancatcher, and you don't have anything else to put on your mercenary at that point, then by all means, throw it on your merc. But know that as soon as you get anything better, and it is very easy to get anything better, it's going straight in the garbage. And that brings us to the next item on the list, Radament's Sphere. So Radament Sphere is another one of those unique items that just doesn't really work out. I don't really know what exactly they were thinking when they tried to make Radament Sphere, but the moral of the story is that it's not really a good shield and nobody really wants to use it. It has a lot of issues. It goes with a poison theme, and like a lot of the items that go with a poison theme, they tend to fail because poison itself doesn't work well. Poison explosion charges is one thing that a lot of people probably aren't going to use. Level 6 Poison Explosion does relatively no poison damage at level 50, and on top of that, despite the fact that it has an AoE effect, if you've ever actually seen Poison Explosion, the Poison Explosion is so small that it hits basically nothing. So even if you were to use it, there's a very good chance you wouldn't even hit anything with it when you used it. I don't know why the radius of Poison Explosion is so terribly small, but it's just not worth the effort. On top of that, it doesn't really have any resistances except for poison resistance. At level 50, you're well on your way into Nightmare difficulty, where the resistance penalties are starting to hit you. And by the time you reach Hell difficulty, the resistance penalties have gotten really, really bad. And this is a huge issue for a shield that has no resistances. If you've ever played Diablo II at any point in your life for a considerable amount of time, you will know that your shield is where most of your resistances end up coming from, in the form of a spirit shield, maybe Herald of Zakarum, maybe you're using a rhyme shield for Cannot Be Frozen. There are tons and tons and tons of shields in this game that are so much better than this one. And it tries to augment the fact that it's not particularly a very good shield by coming up with some other things to add in. So for instance, we've got 5% chance to cast level 5 Poison Nova when struck. 5% is so low that it will almost never happen. But let's pretend that it did happen. Let's pretend it was 50% chance to cast level 5 Poison Nova. Level 5 Poison Nova is not high enough to do anything. It lasts for 2 seconds, and it does like about 200 damage, if that. On top of that, the shield also has 80 poison damage over 4 seconds. And the 80 poison damage over 4 seconds will also not stack with Poison Nova, and it will also not stack with Poison Explosion. So if you were to use this specifically for the idea that it involves, the Poison Nova, the Poison Explosion, and the Poison Damage, none of them stack together. So the Poison Explosion is not going to stack with the Nova is not going to stack with the damage isn't going to stack with the explosion, and so forth and so on. And you're literally just left with 3 pitiful poison damage effects that won't even stack together to like combine like a Megazord to at least make something that might be worthwhile. And again, 80 poison damage over 4 seconds, just like the Viper Manfork, is so ridiculously low that it is to be laughable. Especially when you consider the fact that in Nightmare difficulty, all monsters have 50% poison reduction. So you're looking at 80 poison damage over 4 seconds is going to be reduced very quickly to 40 poison damage over 2 seconds. And when you get to Hell difficulty, that ends up being divided into a third. So you end up with 1/3 of the poison damage, which is even worse. And it's just a shield that doesn't quite make a lot of sense. I understand the theme that they were going for. They were trying to make it kind of seem like you're Radament, right? You're shooting out poison, and you've got poison explosions, and you've got poison novas, and when you bop somebody on the head, you've got poison damage. But the poison explosion is too low to be useful. The poison nova is too low to be useful, and the poison damage is, again, too low to be useful. And when you take away all the poison effects from this shield, what are you left with? You're left with a shield that has somewhat decent defense, a decent amount of blocking and faster blocking rate, but that's nothing that you couldn't get from a Rhyme Shield, from a Spirit, from a Herald of Zakarum, from just about any unique shield out there. There's several set shields that are better than that in terms of just simply raw defense and block chance. And on top of that, it has a 110 strength requirement, which is pretty high for most characters. Granted, by the time you hit like level 75 or level 80, you've got enough to use your 156 Monarch shield. But by then, when you compare a Radament Sphere to something like a Monarch shield, it's complete and utter garbage that you wouldn't even bother to deign. About the only thing that's cool about this shield is how it looks. It does have a very interesting appearance, but let me tell you what, there's two other shields in the game that share this appearance: the Ward Gothic shield and the Spirit Ward shield. And both of them have the same appearance, and they both are way better shields than this shield. So if you wanted to specifically get the appearance of this particular shield, there's other options. In fact, I would recommend both the Ward Gothic shield and the other elite version of the shield, the Ward, because they are just so much better. I'm just dropping on the ground at this point because I'm not keeping them. I'm definitely not keeping them. Moving on to the next item on the list. Kinemil's All. So this particular sword is one of those really bad swords that doesn't really have a good grasp on like what a paladin is. Kinemil's All is a two-handed sword, not a one-handed sword, that seemed to be aimed directly at paladins. And the problem with this is that they didn't aim it at paladins like, hey, use this as a charge paladin, because that would have been cool. Or, they didn't aim it specifically at a paladin in a way that made sense. They put a two-handed sword, and they gave it +6 holy fire, extra fire damage, a decent amount of enhanced damage, and then they also gave it plus mana, which I don't even understand why it has plus mana. Let me lay this down for you in a way that you'll understand. Holy Fire is a skill that applies fire damage to your attack, right? So it doesn't matter how fast you swing. If you're swinging really slow, donk, or if you're swinging really fast, ding, 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 it's going to apply that fire damage on every single successful hit that you make. So in general, when you're using something like Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, or Holy Shock, you want to attack faster, not slower. And the reason for this is because you want to apply that fire damage as quickly as possible. And putting the +6 Holy Fire on a two-handed weapon, which is going to be slow, and not giving it any increased attack speed, is a slap in the face to anybody who actually wants to build a Holy Fire Paladin, because at this point you are now wielding a slow, unwieldy weapon on your Paladin. In fact, let's go over to a Paladin real quick. All right, so here we are over on the Paladin, and I mean, as you can see, it has a very pretty blue graphic with kind of like what seems to be almost like phoenix wings. I mean, as far as the graphic goes on the sword, it certainly is a very pretty one, but it doesn't really fulfill the goal which it needs to fulfill. So we've already gone over the fact that it's a slower weapon with basically no increased attack speed on what is basically a character who is designed around the fastest attacks possible. Any kind of Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, or Holy Shock Paladin wants to attack quickly. They don't want to attack slow. On top of this, it completely forgoes a shield. So one of the Paladin's most endearing and critical enhancements that makes the Paladin so amazing is the fact that he has a holy shield that can dish out the most amazing amount of defense possible. It gives him a huge portion of block chance. It gives him a massive bonus to his defense. It gives him, just amazing effects. And in fact, most of the time when you build a paladin, it doesn't really matter what shield you're wielding, because quite honestly, most paladin shields are actually pretty sweet, and they have some very amazing effects on them. And it's not necessarily to pinpoint any specific shield, but just simply to say that a paladin without a shield is at an extreme disadvantage because the character is balanced that way. They are actually physically balanced around the entire idea of having a shield, and so when you remove one from a paladin, they become extremely weaker as a result. And Kinemil's All is a sword that basically tempts a paladin to be a non-shield wielding paladin, to be the characters that don't actually use a shield. And the funny thing here is that it doesn't really work out too well. You could try, for instance, to pair this up with maybe Charge ability to get some massive amount of physical damage on a single target. But see, Charge is about a single massive hit, and Holy Fire doesn't gain any damage from this. So when you go with a slower attack, you are hurting your overall DPS with Holy Fire because there's no reason to use Holy Fire with anything that's not a quick ability, which is the reason why almost all of the time when you build a character, build a paladin, and you use Holy Fire, Holy Shock, or Holy Freeze, you tend to go with the combat skills that will best augment those. Like, for instance, Zeal, because Zeal can apply those hits as quickly as humanly possible. And the downside, of course, of having an ability like this, or a weapon like this, which is two-handed, is you're going to go into combat and you're going to fight monsters, and they are going to absolutely demolish you. Number one, you no longer have the ability to attack quickly. You can try to, of course, but you're not going to dish out damage anywhere near as quickly as if you were using something like a Phase Blade, which would definitely be a hell of a lot faster than the Kinemil's All. Now, granted, you could augment Kinemil's All with something like Fanaticism to make your character attack faster. But here's the thing. Holy Fire is one of those abilities that you have to use. It's one of the auras. So as soon as you put Holy Fire on your character, you can no longer use your Fanaticism aura. It is a very poorly thought out weapon, in my opinion, and quite honestly, just one of the worst uniques, I think, in the game. I rarely ever, honestly, see a character actually utilize this as a paladin. In fact, I would imagine that just something as simple as a Saigon's Shield with +1 and something like a Honor War Scepter with maybe +3 Holy Fire on it, which is what, 4, 5? So +5, and you still get to use a shield, would definitely be a better low-level option than Kinemil's All. Now, granted, if you were a Holy Fire Paladin and you happen to find this at level 23, and you were beefing up Holy Fire to its utmost, you know, maybe you've got maximum resist fire, and you've got a couple points into the actual skill. So I'm saying at level 23, you've got, what, 23 points, right? So you could have dumped 20 points into resist fire, and you could have put 3 points into Holy Fire. This could be an interesting sword just simply to get the added fire damage. If you take a look at Holy Fire, the radial Holy Fire goes from 65 to 208 to 18 to 82 just by putting the sword on. So you do get a little bit of radial effect by increasing it by 6 levels in this one scenario. But as soon as you're capable of utilizing something better, you're probably going to. And the downside of not having a shield while using this is going to be readily apparent as the monsters literally shred you to pieces because you can no longer block and you don't have any kind of bonuses or resistances from this particular item. If this was a little bit lower level item, I could see using it on Holy Fire Paladins early on where things don't really matter, but it just doesn't quite fit the bill. Let's move on to the next item on the list, which is the Alma Negra. The Alma Negra is an elite Sacred Rondash, and it is quite honestly just a really terrible unique for its level. One of the things that I talk about all the time in Diablo 2 is judging a unique item or an item by its level. Okay, so, you know, if you find something that's level 10, you judge it based on the qualifiers of what makes a good level 10 item. If you have an item that's level 77, like the Alma Negra, you have to judge it based on end game level statistics. So the items that this piece of equipment goes up against are things like Herald of Zakarum, a spirit shield for a paladin in a paladin base, a rhyme shield in a paladin base, a splendor in a paladin base. You could also compare it to the dragon scale. You could compare it to a monarch shield, the storm shield, monarch shield. You could compare it to quite a large number of shields in this game, including a Moser's Blessed Circle. And the correct answer to the question is if you were to rate all of those shields from number 1 to the bottom of the tier, which shield would be at the bottom? And undoubtedly, it is the Alma Negra. Why is the Alma Negra so low on the list, especially when you compare it to other such shields like the Herald of Zakarum or even something like the Dragon Scale shield? The reason is because it has nothing special. It's a +2 shield with faster blocking and increased chance of blocking. This is probably its really only redeeming characteristic, and any other good shield out there has similar effects. The Herald of Zakarum shield, for instance, has +4 to a specific branch of the Paladin's trees and +2 to all. And then it also has faster blocking rate, increased chance of blocking, enhanced defense, and all of that. So what is the only special effect that Alma Negra has, which is the reason why it doesn't stack up? And that is the bonus damage and the bonus attack rating. Alma Negra is an offensive shield. And the real issue with the Alma Negra is that it does not have enough bonus to make it worthwhile. Let me give you the clearest example of why Alma Negra is a very poor option for a lot of characters. If you were going to use a damage shield, an offensive shield, one of the easiest things for you to do would be to use a Phoenix. The Phoenix shield in a 45 all-res base would by far outstretch the 75% enhanced damage on the Alma Negra. Even if you were to put something in here like a 50% enhanced damage or a 40% enhanced damage jewel with 15% IAS, it's not going to eclipse the 400% that Phoenix offers. And on top of that, this shield has no all resistances. And the Phoenix would have 45 all res if made in the proper base. In fact, you could theoretically make a large number of shields that would still have better resistances, more defense, and more plus to skills than something like this, all together in a nice package. Take, for instance, a Spirit Shield. A Spirit Shield has all resistances, right? So you don't necessarily have to use an all resistance base. You could find a Paladin Shield that has enhanced damage on it if you wanted specifically to have the enhanced damage. And that means that the Alma Negra can't even compete with something like a Spirit Shield, because the Spirit Shield could literally be made in an enhanced damage base, still get the all resistances, still get the +2 to skills, and still get the defensive characteristics, all while making the Alma Negra look like an absolute piece of garbage. My biggest issue with the Alma Negra is that it doesn't really achieve the goal that it set out to achieve. They need to increase the enhanced damage on the Alma Negra probably by a large margin. I'm thinking like 300 to 400% enhanced damage for it to become something that a paladin would actually want to put on. On top of that, the 75% bonus to attack rating would also need to be increased a massive margin. I'm thinking at least 200%, if not higher bonus to attack rating to actually make it worth putting on in those regards. And honestly, it needs something else. Like, it needs another characteristic to be added on top. +2 Paladin with decent blocking is not enough, because everything that you can put on just about in place of this has +2 Paladin with good block chance. You don't need that particular characteristic to make this shield good. This shield is trying to do something else. It's trying to be an offensive shield. You could add on Deadly Strike. You could add on Open Wounds. You could add on Crushing Blow. You could add on a myriad of characteristics which could make this interesting as an offensive shield and still not add any resistances, and it would be an interesting option in place of something like a Herald of Zakarum. But It just doesn't have any of that. And because it doesn't have any of that, it ends up being a mediocre at best shield, and quite honestly, one of the worst unique shields, I think, in the entire game. I think Radament Sphere is probably the only one that I would rate lower than this particular shield, and it's specifically because there's just so many better options. I mean, if you put me in front of a table, like full of shields, just going all the way down like it was a yard sale or something, and you said, pick the shield you want, it's yours for free, the Alma Negra would definitely not be the shield that I chose. Would I use it? Yes. If I didn't have anything better, if I didn't have the runes for a spirit, if I didn't have the base for a spirit, if I was a brand new ladder character and the Alma Negra dropped right into my lap and I didn't have anything else on, yes, I would use it. But as soon as I found anything better, it would get replaced. And there's a very good chance that an Ancient's Pledge in a 3-socket Paladin base would win out over this, because at level 77, I need resistances, especially if I'm a low-level ladder character, which means that there is a very good chance I'm not going to utilize this shield just simply because I need resists and I'm dying, and this shield does not offer those. Moving on to the next item on the list, Templar's Might. So Templar's Might is another one of those unique items that just has to be judged based on high-level characteristics. If it was a low-level item, it might actually be useful. But because it is a high-level item, it is not. Even in its ethereal form, it is really still quite bad, and the only characteristic that it has, honestly, is the enhanced defense. It is a very high defense piece of equipment, but as many people will tell you, defense is not the most important statistic in the game. Granted, having defense is important. In fact, I usually recommend that people have at least about 5,000 defense when they get to Hell difficulty, because if you don't have about 5,000 defense, you tend to get hit by everything, unless you're like an Amazon who dodges everything, and in that case, you're dodging everything. Why is this such a pitiful piece of equipment? Let me lay it out for you. Offensive auras is not really a good plus to skills. In most situations, when you're a paladin, what you're really looking for is combat skills. Offensive auras is like not really preferred, but it's something that if you were, had no other choice, you would certainly take it. But it's not something that you're going to go out of your way to build unless you happen to be like a Holy Shock or a Holy Freeze Paladin or something like that. And even then, you would still prefer +2 all, not +2 offensive. So in any situation that matters, you're going to try and get +2 all, and there are plenty of +2 all armors. I mean, right off the top of my head, we've got Arcane's Valor, we've got Enigma, there's the Paladin Elite Rune Word, which is Principle, which has +2, and honestly, I would take a Principle over this armor any day of the week. It doesn't really have anything else to offer either. There's no Cannot Be Frozen, there's no Prevent Monster Heal, there's no Open Wounds, there's no Crushing Blow, there's no special effects on this armor whatsoever. I mean, it literally only has +2 offensive auras, some faster hit recovery, which isn't really a lot, enhanced defense and defense versus missile, and then it has strength, which is almost a slap in the face because of the 232 strength requirement on this thing, which is prohibitive in the nth degree. You might think to yourself, well, hey, I could throw this on a mercenary. But most mercenaries don't even have the strength requirement to put this armor on. Even in its ethereal form, 222 is too high for most of the mercenaries. So you couldn't even effectively use it as a merc item unless you gave the mercenary some plus strength equipment. And then Vitality also doesn't help mercenaries. So the only effect that it has that isn't specifically for a mercenary is the Vitality, really. And even at that point, it's I just don't understand. And then on top of all that, like a slap in the face, I mean, a really high strength requirement, really ridiculously bad stats, and then on top of that, they throw max stamina. They're like, hey, this armor's not bad enough. Let's put some maximum stamina on there. That'll really clinch it. And why? You know, if I found an Ethereal Templar's Might, I would probably keep it. And the reason why I probably keep it is just simply because it's a rare item, and it's not easy to come by an Ethereal Templar's Might. As far as the defense goes, if I had a choice to choose this item over quite a few other choices, I wouldn't choose it. There are some much better choices for high defense armors. One in particular that I would recommend over this any day of the week, and it's actually much easier to come by, is the Runeward Stone. The Runeward Stone is a massive defense piece of equipment with extremely high faster hit recovery, and it also has a Clay Golem charge, which you can use, and then you get even more defensive capability out of it because your Clay Golem's around murdering everything. Stone is by far a better choice than Templar's Might in just about every scenario, and there are even better options in the unique variety for a high defense. In fact, if you wanted something specifically for high defense, I would recommend the Steel Carapace as a better choice over the Templar's Might. Moving on to the next item on the list is a very strange mace called Moonfall. Moonfall is a jagged star, and it can be upgraded, but unfortunately it's one of those items which is just really bad. Let's go over it together and let's talk about why it's bad and why I rate it as one of the worst uniques in the game. At level 42, 60 to 92 damage is not a lot. There are quite a few items that actually surpass 60 to 92 damage relatively easily. It is a one-handed weapon, of course, and it doesn't have any increased attack speed on it whatsoever. Most one-handed weapons, or rather melee weapons you're looking for, you usually want something on the faster side than the slower side, especially when you're dealing with a one-handed weapon. And it is just really slow. At level 42, 55 to 115 fire damage is extraordinarily low for a character who is literally entering into Nightmare difficulty and is going to be coming up against quite a large number of monsters. In fact, by the time you end up using this, you're getting close to Act 4 Nightmare, and Act 4 Nightmare is completely filled with fire immunes. So the only advantage that this weapon has is completely trumped by all the fire immunes that start to appear in Nightmare difficulty. On top of that, they give you charges for Meteor, level 11 Meteor, and then it also casts level 6 Meteor, both of which are not really high enough damage to actually do any good for you. Maybe at level 42 exactly, when you first put this item on, you could potentially kill some monsters with it, but if for the most part, the level 11 unsynergized Meteor isn't really going to kill a whole lot of anything in Nightmare difficulty. In fact, just for fairness, let's go to Nightmare difficulty and let's walk out of the blood more and let's try and use Meteor on some monsters and see how well it kills them, shall we? And then, of course, the other downside here is that you've got to repair the item. They're not. It's not an O skill. It's just, you know, it's just, hey, here's 60 Meteor charges. You know, use them to your heart's content. So let's see how Meteor does versus some monsters in Nightmare difficulty. Come on, come on. And you know, as you can see here, like I said, on level, at the exact level that you put this item on, it is decent, because you can actually kill some monsters with the meteors. But as you level up very quickly, the meteors become so bad and so worthless as far as damage is concerned that you wouldn't even think to use them. And the level 6 meteor that actually comes from the item is even worse. And then, as if a bigger slap in the face, it's a pretty huge cost to repair each one of the charges to actually keep up with this. And at level 42, your gold reserves are not going to last out forever spamming meteors. And to top it off, there are just so many better choices at this level. There's so many better choices. You could be using the Butcher's Pupil. You could be using Baronair's Star shortly later. You could be using quite a large number of daggers, axes. I mean, just even something like an upgraded... I think right off the top of my head, one of the lower level uniques that could even be better than this. It's The Bloodrise Morningstar. The Bloodrise Morningstar is a normal level unique, and it has 120% enhanced damage, so it's only 30% shy of the Moonfall Jagged Star, but it also has increased attack speed, life steal, it has open wounds, it has bonus to attack rating. I mean, in general, like this item is so poor by comparison to something like an upgraded Bloodrise Morningstar that I wouldn't even think to use this over that. I would rather have the upgraded Bloodrise Morningstar. And many of the Nightmare level uniques are better than this item by far. I mean, you can take one look at the Nightmare level uniques, and each one of them has an effect which is better than this weapon. The Sure Shrill Frost Flanged Mace is definitely better than the Moonfall Jagged Star. Bazile's Vortex, I would even say, is better than the Moonfall Jagged Star. And as you look at your other options, you go, okay, well, I could be using, Ginther's Rift, or I could be using, a Crush Flange for extra crushing blow, or I could be using a freaking Razor Tine, like Trident, or like there's tons of different items in the game that can offer special effects like Crushing Blow, Open Wounds, slows target by, Deadly Strike, also Life Steal, which this is completely missing. Also, any kind of like increased speed, like speed over damage. There are a lot of items like this, like even Diggler's Dirk. I would still rate as higher than this item because Diggler's Dirk has ignores target's defense, and it is extremely fast. This item has no ignores target's defense, and it's not fast. And in general, I just think that Moonfall Jagged Star really missed the mark on what it was trying to achieve. If they had increased the percent chance of the meteors, maybe a little bit higher, if they had made the meteor on striking, maybe a little bit higher, or perhaps made the level 11 meteor an O skill, that could be an interesting way to do things. But as it is, the Moonfall Jagged Star, I believe, is one of the worst uniques in the game. Moving on to the next unique item on the list, Stormspire. That's right, another elite item. This is an elite item that really missed the mark, in my opinion, and quite honestly, just didn't really make for a good item, let alone a good elite item, and it does have to be judged again based upon those high-level standards. Maybe as a lower-level item, this item could have potentially had some use, but as a level 70 endgame piece of equipment, it just doesn't really fit the bill. It's a Giant Thresher, and the Giant Threshers are amazing items. In fact, a lot of people search for ethereal or non-ethereal Giant Threshers to make rune words in. But this one just really misses the mark. With extremely high strength and dex requirements and an extremely high level of level 70, it has some of the most mediocre effects on it. It's fast. It has 30% enhanced increased speed, which is okay, I guess. And it also has 250% enhanced damage, which does give it a pretty decent damage for a non-ethereal item. However, it also has the indestructible mechanic, which means that it cannot spawn ethereal at all. So you cannot find an ethereal version of this. You cannot Zod it. You can't put an ethereal version on your Merc, for instance, for the extra damage, which puts it below just about every other unique, which could potentially roll ethereal. Like, for instance, a Tomb Reaver can roll ethereal, and it is way better than this item. A Ariox Needle can roll ethereal, and it is way better than this item. And quite honestly, you will find that there are very few items that are worse than a Stormspire Giant Thresher, even considering Nightmare level uniques. Like, for instance, you can upgrade an Ethereal Honsudan Yari to a Ghost Spear, and it will outperform this weapon considerably. On top of that, it also has some very mediocre effects. 2% chance to cast level 20 unsynergized Charged Bolt is awful. Level 20 Charged Bolt is going to do all of like 50 damage. Level 20 Charge Bolt is not a lot of damage. Each bolt is going to do a certain amount of damage, and being able to, completely unpredictable in when it casts, you can't even focus it on a target really. So it's just going to do whatever it wants to do, and if you're getting hit by ranged attacks, if you're getting hit by spells, the only time it might actually do a little bit of damage is when you're in melee range of a monster and that melee monster triggers the ability, because it will hit all of the bolts will hit him. But even then, even under those situations, it's still very lackluster. Maybe if it was being used by a sorceress who was, fully synergized in charged bolts, like a bear sorceress or something, right? But here's the thing, it's only a 2% chance, which means it very rarely, if ever, procs. Then on top of that, we have another 5% chance to cast level 5 Chain Lightning, which again is so low level at level 70 that it does basically nothing. And then to top it all off, they give us a really mediocre amount of lightning damage. Take, for instance, Azure Wrath, which has 500 cold damage on it. It's a one-handed weapon and it swings really fast, okay? And now we have a Giant Thresher, which is nowhere near as fast as an Azure Wrath, and it deals 237 lightning damage, which is less than half of the amount of cold damage that Azure Wrath does, at basically the same level. 237 lightning damage is so pathetic that it basically does nothing. The only character that could even get any use out of this, in my opinion, would be a lightning mastery sorceress that could enhance the lightning damage on the weapon even further. But honestly, in any scenario that I can think of in my mind, I would not want to use this on a melee sorceress. I would probably rather go with another weapon. Most notably, something like an Infinity, maybe a Honsudan Yari for crushing blow and extra speed, or perhaps even an Obedience for extra faster hit recovery. There are a lot of different options that I might go with a two-handed weapon on a sorceress, but honestly, if I was going to go melee sorceress, I would probably go one-handed and shield because it's faster, it's more survivable, and I'm a sorceress. I'm going to be in there beating things. Why would I want to put myself in a situation where I'm going to be even more vulnerable, wielding a weapon that basically does nothing for me? And then on top of that, they give it 50% lightning resistance, which is, of course, is supposed to go along with the entire theme of the item, the theme being lightning damage. But the problem is that it really missed its mark. The chain lightning is too low to be useful. The charged bolt isn't really useful because it has an extremely low proc chance of only 2%, which means it's very rarely, if ever, going to go off. And the lightning damage that they added is so low that it is to be laughable. And the resistances, the 50% lightning resistance, while it's nice to have 50% lightning resistance, I've often noted that any other option that you could put in this place would probably have better resistances. You would probably, on a melee sorceress, be better off with a wizard spike than something like this. Which leads us to our next option, our next horrible unique, which is the Stormspike. You're noticing a theme here. A lot of storm-based items, and they all seem to be terrible. I don't know why they had trouble balancing these particular items. The Stormspike is a stiletto, and it is an item that also, in the same vein as the Stormspire, misses the mark completely. 25% chance to cast level 3 Charge Bolt. So kind of the same thing going on here that was with the Stormspire. The Stormspire had this really high level of Charge Bolt, but at a really low percentage to cast it. And this one has a really low level of Charge Bolt with a really high percentage to cast it. So you're going to get really crappy Charge Bolts going off all the time. Because it's a stiletto, it is a range 1 weapon, which really sucks. It doesn't really have amazing damage for its level. It has no increased attack speed. It has no really amazing effect. In fact, the 90% lightning resistance, which by the way is based off of character level, doesn't even really compare to something like a wizard spike. If I was going to put on this item, I would stop myself, slap my hand, and then immediately go, just put on a wizard spike instead. It's 75 all res, and you can socket it, and you can put in like a 15 all res jewel, and now you have literally, 75, 85, 90 all res on a single item. Why would I trade 90 all resistances for 90 to a single resistance? It's a absolutely terrible, terrible way to go. On top of that, it also, similarly to the Stormspire, has a lightning damage which is really low. Now, at level 41, 120 is a lot better than the 266 on the Stormspire that was at level like 70-something as an endgame item. Even then, though, unfortunately, the Stormspike Stiletto just really falls short of any kind of interesting mechanic. If they changed the 25% chance to cast level 3 Charged Bolt to something like Static Field or maybe Lightning or, anything that could actually be useful on the character as you're playing, I could imagine that it could be an interesting choice, but it's not. Honestly, I probably wouldn't even use this to make an Iron Golem. Moving on to our next item, and that is Atma's Wail. So Atma's Wail is an embossed plate that you can find, and it drops fairly often. But the main issue with Atma's Wail is it just doesn't really offer a whole lot of anything specific at a time when you really need some specific things. Around level 51, when you put this on, you are making your way through Nightmare difficulty. And Nightmare difficulty is a place that is pretty rough on a lot of characters, especially since you don't really need very many resistances to beat normal, and by the time you get to Nightmare, you kind of haven't really worked out your resists properly. And so going into Nightmare difficulty with an armor like this that offers no resistances whatsoever can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. It has decent defense, and that's pretty much the only thing that I can say about this plate in, a positive light, is that the Atma's Wail embossed plate and the Atma's Wail embossed plate ethereal version have some pretty decent defense for their level. And the faster hit recovery can come in handy, but there are certainly better items that you could put on a mercenary to make them have good defense and faster hit recovery. I feel like there's probably 100 better choices out there than Atma's Wail. Now, granted, if you don't have anything else, and I'm going to say this over and over again, if you don't have anything else, a lot of these uniques can be useful under specific circumstances. Like, say you're a solo self-found character and Atma's Wail was just the only plate of armor that you happen to find, then by all means, put it on. Don't just drop it on the ground because I'm telling you it's one of the worst unique items in the game, but keep in mind that it's just not a good item. It has a relatively high strength requirement for an item of 125 at level 51. It offers statistics which almost make me think that it was designed for a sorceress, with things like increased maximum mana, replenish life, magic find, but the magic find on it is only 20%. Most characters around level 51 have already kind of gotten their magic find sorted. They're working on things like a 3 topaz armor or a 4 topaz armor, or maybe they have made themselves a wealth for magic find, or maybe they've gotten lucky enough to find something like Skulder's Ire, or maybe even some of the other magic find plates in the game, like for instance maybe a gold skin. There's a lot of different items in the game which can be utilized specifically for magic finding. Even items that come with multiple sockets, like something like a Spirit Forged Link Mail with 2 topazes in it, or a Griswold's Heart, which is 3 sockets with 3 topazes in it. And there's just so many better options than Atma's Wail as far as like actually utilizing the best effects for your character. I don't necessarily think that this is unusable, but in comparison to just about every other item out there, if you had the choice between, like I've said before, if you literally had the choice between a whole bunch of different armors sitting on the table, this is probably, again, not the one that you would choose. Moving on, which I think is the last item, I'll need to double check, but I'm pretty sure this is the last item, is the Skull Splitter Military Pick. The Skull Splitter Military Pick is one of the worst items, I think, in the game. And the reason is because, number one, it's a military pick. It doesn't have anything to do with the unique effects, which is kind of sad because, it's not necessarily a good base. Military picks, Crowbills, and I can't remember the elite one right off the top of my head, are just bad axe bases in general. They're not, in my opinion, one of the ones that anyone really looks for. Nobody I've ever heard of comes to me and goes, "Hey, have you found an ethereal, 4-socket skull splitter? I want to make a beast in it," or something like that. Or, "Hey, have you found a 5-socket ethereal skull splitter? I want to make a death in it." No, they look for Etna axes, they look for berserker's axes, they look for phase blades, they look for conquest swords, they look for all sorts of different weapons, but nobody looks for this base. And then to make matters worse, it doesn't really have good statistics. It has a halfway decent amount of enhanced damage, but at 14 to 22, it's actually pretty terrible for level 21. There's so many better weapons that you could be wielding at this level. It has a decent amount of attack rating, which I'm not going to talk bad about. And then the lightning damage on it is 1 to 12, which is absolutely god-awful for level 21. Maybe at level 5, 1 to 12 lightning damage would have been great, but at level 21, that's basically going to do nothing. And then 15% chance of open wounds, which is always nice to have on an item. But why 15%? Why is it so low? And then hits blind target +2, which is halfway decent in normal difficulty, becomes completely useless in nightmare difficulty, and I don't even want to talk about how useless +2 blinds target is in hell difficulty, because the duration is decreased massively, so you need more hits blinds target to actually make it useful, and I probably would never use a skull splitter military pick in hell difficulty anyway. And then the only other effect that it has, which is anywhere near decent, is the regenerate mana 20%. Now, the main problem with the regenerate mana 20% is that, number one, most characters and most players have a really small mana pool around this level. And regenerate mana does not work very well unless you have a large mana pool. The larger your mana pool, the better regenerate mana works. So having regeneration of mana at a low level does relatively nothing. You could put this on a sorceress with like 100 mana, and it would have like almost no effect on her regeneration whatsoever. The same thing for a necromancer, a paladin, a barbarian. All of those characters around level 21 have horrible mana pools, and the regeneration is basically doing nothing at that point, unless you've decided to stack energy. And what is the number one thing that every YouTuber tells you? Don't put any points into energy, right? So when you're using this particular item, the regeneration of mana is a moot point and does practically nothing. The only two effects on this item, the chance to open wounds and the hits blinds target, would relegate it to something like an offhand item. And the only use that I can really think of it for in a melee standpoint is to like put it in the offhand of like a barbarian who has a much better main hand weapon, just simply to get the blinds target and the chance of open wounds. But even then, I feel like there's probably better choices. In fact, I would probably rather use something like a Death Spade axe upgraded once, which also has hits blind target, by the way. Oh man, I've been going on for 52 minutes on the worst unique items in the game, and I hope you enjoyed this little rant on all of the unique items which I consider bad. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and don't hate me for calling these items terrible, because, well, they are. And as always, keep watching.